Snow drifted past the bay window in slow, weightless spirals, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of white and pale blue. Inside, the house hummed with the practiced cheer of Christmas morning, garland looped over the mantel, an evergreen candle flickering its manufactured scent, the same Bing Crosby record my mother had queued up every December since I was 8. I stood near the staircase, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee, watching my family arrange themselves the way they always did, Madison cross-legged on the rug in front of the tree, Mom perched on the edge of the wingback chair so the camera would catch her best profile, Dad anchoring the sofa with a posture that looked casual until you noticed how tightly his hands gripped his knees. Madison's laugh filled the room first, bright as tinsel. She held a square box no larger than a jewelry case, wrapped in metallic gold paper that threw shards of light across the pine needle-littered floor. Mom's smile spread wide enough to show the dimple she insisted came from her own mother. "Go on, honey," she prompted, phone angled for the perfect shot. "Open it." I knew what would come next, the delighted gasp, the theatrical widening of Madison's hazel eyes, the ritual chorus of "Oh my gods." I also knew that somewhere among the lower branches a plain white envelope waited with my name printed in Dad's steady block letters. Likely another gift card, maybe a check dutifully signed, the dollar amount determined less by generosity than by whatever balance remained after Madison's presents were tallied. Yet this year something inside me felt strangely steady. No flutter in my chest, no acidic twinge of anticipation. I sipped the coffee, let its faint bitterness settle on my tongue, and watched the scene unfold as if it were a rerun. The gold paper tore easily. Madison's manicured nails, painted winter rose at the salon Mom paid for yesterday, slid the lid free. For a breath she was silent. Then she gave the room what it expected, a sharp inhale, hands to her heart, eyes shining. "A key," she whispered, though the volume carried. She lifted it between thumb and forefinger, silver under the tree lights. Mom's voice trembled with performative pride. "Not just any key, sweetheart. The key to your first home. We closed last week." Applause erupted. Dad rose to squeeze Madison's shoulder, his grin softening into the paternal warmth I used to crave. My mother sniffed, dabbing the corner of her eye like a matinee actress halfway through the second act. I glanced toward the coffee table. There it was, the envelope, unceremonious, tucked under a ribbon scrap. Madison launched into gratitude, strings of thank yous looping around the living room like garland. I caught snippets: perfect neighborhood, room for a studio, imagine the summer parties. No one asked where the mortgage came from or how property taxes would be handled. Details never interfered with the Walkers' holiday pageant. When Mom finally turned toward me, her expression shifted the way stage lights do between scenes, bright enough to suggest inclusion, dim enough to hide disinterest. "Emily, honey, your father has something for you, too." She nodded to the envelope, as though I might have missed it. I set my mug on the windowsill and picked up the thin offering. The flap opened with a sigh. Inside, a white card wished me warmest holiday blessings. Tucked behind it, a check for $200, generous enough to appear thoughtful, modest enough to maintain the unspoken hierarchy. I remembered being 9, waking early to frost cupcakes I baked myself because the bakery was closed Christmas Eve. I'd arranged them on a plate beside a note that read "Happy Birthday" to me. Mom had been too busy steaming Madison's costume for the Christmas pageant to notice. That same hollowness might have swallowed me again today, but instead I felt a quiet distance, as though the girl in that memory belonged to another family entirely. Madison leaned over to inspect my envelope, the key still dangling from her hand. "Nice," she said, voice syrupy. "Gas or grocery money?" "Both, if I'm careful," I replied, folding the check and sliding it back. My tone sounded polite even to my own ears, an old reflex. Dad cleared his throat. Your mother and I thought it'd help with heating bills up north. Bitter winter this year. Thoughtful, I said. The word floated in the air, lighter than I intended, drifting somewhere between sincerity and satire. Mom resumed her camera work. Group photo time. Madison, show the key. Emily, maybe hold your card? I positioned myself beside my sister, the envelope limp in my fingers. Madison's gleam eclipsed the tree lights. My own reflection in the window behind her looked faint, almost transparent. But I smiled anyway, because a smile costs nothing and, lately, the economy of silence suited me. Mom counted down. Flash. Everyone blinked. Madison giggled. Dad announced cinnamon rolls were ready. The family shuffled toward the kitchen, leaving a constellation of torn wrapping paper and stray bows at my feet. I lingered by the tree, brushing a fallen pine needle from my sweater. The room smelled of sap and cinnamon, of traditions worn thin by repetition. Beneath the pine branches, wrapping remained, a small stray length of gold ribbon, glinting even in the dim. I picked it up, twirled it between my fingers, then slipped it into my pocket next to the folded check. They deserved their celebration, I supposed. Madison would post photos before noon, #FirstHome #blessed. Mom would scroll through comments that praised her generosity. Dad would mention property values over dessert. And I would nod, offer quiet congratulations, and carry on. But under the quiet, I felt something different. An anchored certainty that today marked the last time I'd stand in this living room feeling like an understudy in my own life. The envelope no longer stung, it merely confirmed what I'd already decided. They could keep their applause, their curated joy. I had plans of my own. From the kitchen, Mom called my name, her voice sing-song. I tucked the envelope into my purse, let my smile settle back into place, and walked toward the scent of cinnamon. I don't think anyone noticed the moment my shoulders dropped or the way my breath steadied. They mistook my calm for surrender, as they always had. That was fine. Let them believe the story they'd written for me one more day. I stepped through the doorway, the gold ribbon still hidden in my pocket, and joined the table as though nothing at all had shifted. I smiled, but not for the reason they thought. I once believed there was a flaw in me, an overtuned wire that made every slight ring louder than it should, but the older I grew the more I saw that the house itself was silent and I had merely been straining to hear any note that belonged to me. I remember being 9, up past midnight on Christmas Eve because the boxed cake mix said 35 minutes and I needed every second. I whisked until my wrist ached, frosted 24 lopsided cupcakes with a spoon because the piping bag kept collapsing, and wrote happy birthday to me on a scrap of notebook paper I tucked beneath the plate. Morning arrived in a rush of cold air and burnt toast. Mom, curls still in rollers, stepped around the platter the same way she sidestepped puddles in the driveway, while Dad shouted from the garage that the roads were icy and Madison chirped about her pageant costume. No one noticed the candle at the center, let alone that it should have been lit. Sugar can taste like celebration to a child, so I licked frosting from my fingers, told myself sweetness was enough, and followed them out the door. Years spun forward to sophomore science fair, the gym fogged with sawdust and solder smoke. My hydroelectric dam model lit tiny bulbs when water ran through the chute, a cascade of popsicle stick ingenuity. They called my name for first prize, applause ricocheted off the bleachers, and Mr. Green clapped my shoulder hard enough to rattle my clipboard while saying my parents would be proud. I scanned the seats. Mom and Dad promised they would come, but found only rows of empty folding chairs and a stray winter coat. Driving home alone with the trophy seat belted beside me, I listened to the wiper blades sweep snowflakes into streaks and reread Mom's single-line text, ran long at salon, Madison's shoot tomorrow, proud of you, kiddo, until the glow of the screen hurt my eyes. College didn't change the pattern, At the scholarship banquet the dean pronounced my name with careful diction, a spotlight softened my trembling hands, and cameras flashed like hopeful fireflies. But down in the first row Mom was scrolling through Madison's shampoo commercial selfies, double-tapping hearts into the bright void while I waved from the stage she had forgotten to watch. Afterward, she hugged me at the aisle and said, "Well, at least you're good at something," as though excellence were consolation for being ordinary, then hurried to call my sister about lighting for the next shoot. Thread these moments together, cupcakes untouched, a trophy packed in tissue, a plaque peeking from a canvas tote, and a pattern forms as clean as quilting stitches, every shimmer in my life muted, every sparkle in Madison's amplified. I grew fluent in that quiet. I learned pride could survive on crumbs and that disappointment, when repeated, numbs into expectation. Yet even while the hurt dulled, another truth sharpened. I was never invisible, only useful, steady grades to brag about at dinner parties, a responsible signature for paperwork I hadn't yet seen, proof their parenting worked whenever Madison stumbled. Sitting on a stone bench after commencement, diploma folder under one arm and April wind teasing the tassel that Mom didn't photograph, I understood usefulness holds its own kind of leverage. What can be used can also choose to withdraw. And that small realization, tucked between the pages of a future they couldn't imagine, was the first quiet click of a lock turning. The call came on an icy Monday, the sort of morning when the world felt shrink-wrapped in frost, and Mom's name, bright against the phone screen, looked harmless enough until her practiced cocktail of affection and obligation poured through the speaker. "Sweetheart, your father's thrown out his back again shoveling the driveway. Well, he insists it's only a pulled muscle, you know how he is, but we could really use an extra pair of hands around here." She never asked how I was, never wondered whether school was back in session or if the long drive from Burlington in bad weather might rearrange my own plans. What mattered was whether I remained available, whether my reliability might be withdrawn like a favorite tool. I said I'd come, mostly because refusing her sugary guilt always cost more emotional bandwidth than the favor itself, and so 2 hours later I was steering south on the familiar stretch of Route 7, windshield wipers ticking slow over sleet, trying not to resent the way the house pulled me back with a gravity stronger than ice. Their street was still dressed for December, plastic candles glowing in every window, triple-wide wreath on the portico, while my car tires whispered over salt and slush. Mom opened the front door before I'd killed the engine, her smile flickered in the static air, and she gave me a one-armed hug, cedar-scented perfume brushing my cheek as she pressed a tin of leftover gingerbread into my hands as if generosity could cancel obligation. Inside, the living room looked as though Christmas morning had been freeze-framed, garland crisp, ornaments aligned, gift trap debris long tidied yet some intangible festive pose still held, like actors ordered to remain on stage after the audience left. Dad shuffled from the hallway wearing a brace beneath his sweater, muttering something about slipped discs and how a man couldn't count on snowblowers anymore. He nodded hello, no real eye contact, and pointed me toward the garage stacked waist-high with storage bins Madison never helped carry. We spent an hour rotating boxes of artificial greenery and lawn figures, Dad offering grunts of direction while I did the heavier lifting, and each time he winced he segued into commentary about Madison's budding influencer partnerships. Apparently she had landed a seasonal campaign with a boutique candle brand, good exposure. Mom chimed from the doorway, holding a mug that proclaimed best MOM ever. Not once did they ask about my semester schedule, my part-time tutoring, or whether the radiator in my apartment had finally been fixed. My presence was a given, my own narrative optional. Dinner was reheated turkey casserole eaten at the kitchen island under soft Edison bulbs, Mom scrolling her phone between bites to read aloud Madison's boyfriend's latest LinkedIn announcement, a junior-level promotion dressed up as a world event. Dad nodded approval, fork suspended midair, and offered to connect him with someone at the club. I chewed, smiled, let the warmth of the casserole settle like insulation while the deeper chill of becoming wallpaper crept up my arms. By 9 p.m. the house had quieted, Mom claimed exhaustion from holiday cleanup, though most decorations still glittered untouched, and Dad retreated to the den with a heating pad and the local news murmuring low. I wandered the second-floor hallway, a habit resurfacing from childhood insomnia, counting picture frames, tracing patterns in the hardwood where years of foot traffic had dulled the varnish. Madison's framed magazine tear-outs crowded one wall, dairy-free yogurt ad, shampoo splash page, a ballet recital still glossy under glass, while my own scholastic certificates were tucked in a thinner cluster near the linen closet, politely sized, professionally matted, unobtrusive. The farther I walked, the more the house felt museum still, each room curated to celebrate a life I'd never quite lived in, until a crack of yellow light from beneath Dad's office door broke the tableau. He always locked that door by 10, always spun the combination on the wall safe before shutting off the desk lamp, ritual as rigid as grace before meals, so seeing it ajar prickled the back of my neck. I slipped inside, the air heavy with dust and old printer ink, and paused. The safe steel door sat slightly open, the handle drooping like a loose tooth. Papers bulged from a manila folder on the desk, ledger lines, and shaded columns visible even in lamplight, and a thunder-quiet unease rose in my chest, that sense of standing in a draft no one else feels. My heartbeat ticked against the hush, louder than the grandfather clock downstairs, louder than sleet tapping the window, as curiosity tangled with a lifetime of learned compliance. Good daughters respect closed spaces, good daughters don't snoop. I thought of gingerbread tins offered like currency, of Madison's celebratory keys and the envelope still hidden in my purse, of every moment usefulness had replaced closeness, and realized boundaries here were as artificial as the garland packed in boxes. My fingers settled on the cool metal edge. I hesitated for half a second. Then I pulled it open. The envelope was thick, the kind of paper stock you feel between your fingers and know immediately, this was meant to last. It had my name written on it in my father's cursive, the kind he used only for checks and condolence cards. To be opened upon death. The words made my stomach turn. I wasn't sure if it was fear or the fact that the safe, normally latched with neurotic precision, was left open, slightly ajar, as if someone had forgotten how to keep secrets. I didn't open it right away. I stood in the dim office, the only light a brass lamp with a cracked green shade, the only sound the faint humming of the heating vent. For a moment, I thought maybe this was a mistake. Maybe this was meant for someone else. But there it was, my name. Not Madison's. Mine. That alone was enough to feel strange. When I finally unfolded the envelope, the paper crackled like old leaves. Inside were legal documents, a will that looked nothing like the one they had casually mentioned years ago. It listed assets, real estate, investment accounts. I saw addresses I didn't recognize, one in Florida, another in New Hampshire. Then my eyes caught something that made the hair on my arms lift. There it was, a property deed. A tidy 2-story house in Rutland, Vermont, under my name. I blinked, reread it, felt my fingers start to shake. I didn't own a house in Rutland. I'd never even been there. But apparently, I had signed this deed in 2019, according to the line where my signature lived. A looping Emily J. Sanders, perfect penmanship, deliberate curves. But I didn't sign it. I knew that the way you know the back of your own hand. I dropped to the floor, sitting cross-legged on the worn rug, documents fanned out around me like puzzle pieces. Loan agreements, bank transfers, equity lines. My name showed up in just enough places to make it legal, to make it clean. But I hadn't touched any of it. My identity had been a shell, used to funnel something I was never told about. I was never the chosen one. I wasn't their pride. I was their paperwork. Upstairs, the house slept in false peace. Madison's framed ballet photos hung along the stairway wall, her third-place ribbons centered like trophies. My old bedroom, now a guest room, still had a lamp I made in middle school shoved behind a plant. I gathered the papers slowly. Each time I picked one up, it felt heavier than the last. I used my phone to snap quiet pictures, one by one, storing them into a folder I labeled miscellaneous receipts, just in case someone ever borrowed my phone. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. I wasn't even sure I knew what I wanted. But I knew I needed proof. By the time I returned to the guest room, my mind was no longer racing. It was clear. Too clear. I stared at the ceiling, hearing only the low creaks of the house, the hum of distant wind. I wasn't loved. I was leveraged. And for some reason, that didn't break me. It just settled in me like a brick in a still pond. When dawn colored the snow outside the window with a soft pink hue, I stood up, dressed quietly, and slipped my phone into my coat pocket. I passed the closed doors of my parents' bedroom, paused only once at the top of the stairs. Downstairs, I made coffee. Not out of politeness, just to have something to do with my hands. The kitchen was as pristine as always. White tiles, matching mugs, a little chalkboard that read, "Home is where Mom is." I almost laughed. I took my coffee black, sat on the bar stool with my phone in hand, and opened my contact list. Then, I called a lawyer. Tracy Myers didn't gasp, didn't wince, didn't click her tongue in sympathy. She examined each photocopied page as if she were reading the back of a cereal box in the checkout line, steady and methodical, while a winter sun leaked through the frosted window behind her desk and painted silver stripes across the wood grain. At the end she tapped the final sheet, a forged quitclaim deed, as though it were merely out of order in a filing cabinet. "We've seen worse," she said, voice smooth as graphite, "but you have a case." I let out a breath that fogged the rim of my coffee cup. Proof, at least, sounded the same whether uttered in relief or resignation. It wasn't the money that curled under my ribs, it was the theft of consent, the neat way someone had swapped my identity into the blank spaces of their own ledger. Tracy leaned back, temple of dark hair brushing the high leather headrest. "Your parents mortgaged the lake house 3 separate times, first to pay off Madison's clothing line, then a remodel, then something vague labeled operating capital. All under your name. Payments are delinquent." The bank set an auction date for April 20th. A narrow band of panic tried to rise, but I forced it down. So the house could be gone by spring. "To them, maybe," she replied, a wry edge curling the final word. "But foreclosure auctions run on public notice. There's nothing stopping a third party from bidding. Nothing stopping that third party from being, well, friendly to your interests." She slid a slim manila folder across the desk. Inside lay forms already highlighted, instructions for establishing a single-member LLC, sample bidder registration, escrow guidelines. It struck me that Tracy must keep these templates ready, the way a surgeon keeps scalpels laid out before the first incision. I flipped through page after page, each dull paragraph lighting something sharp in my chest. Silence, it seemed, could do more than protect dignity, it could redraw boundaries. Let them believe the world remained in its familiar orbit. Let them toast future lake house parties in blissful ignorance while legal gravity shifted under their feet. We met twice more that week, once in her office, once in a downtown cafe fragrant with espresso and wet wool. Tracy spoke in calm bullet points: transfer funds here, register there, sign but do not notarize until instructed. I asked questions only when the details tangled, she answered without condescension, patient as fresh snow. Nights back in my apartment blurred into scanned PDFs, secure emails, and the muted hum of my space heater. I learned small things. The bank officer handling the foreclosure had a weakness for Red Sox trivia. Auction notices circulated first to an internal list before hitting public record, shell companies named after plants or geology blended best with the corporate forest. By Thursday, Pineglade Holdings LLC existed on paper, its mailing address a rented box in Montpelier. Friday morning brought sleet that pecked the windows like urgent fingers. Tracy and I sat side by side in a conference room at Horizon Title, fluorescent lights buzzing, pens poised. The purchase agreement, optioned through Pineglade, lay waiting. I signed, hand steady, aware of the inversion, using my real signature, finally, for something truly mine. Tracy's counter-signature followed, brisk strokes that felt like a seal. She gathered the papers, slid them into a banker's envelope, and pressed her palm flat on top. "They won't know until the transfer records," she said. "Let them think it's theirs, right up until it's not." The phrase rang like a bell deep in my bones. A lifetime of polite compliance cracked just enough to let cold, clean air rush through. Weeks passed in soft secrecy. I taught my classes, graded essays, answered polite student emails. Between lectures I refreshed the county clerk's website, tracking docket numbers the way some people track weather fronts. Tracy forwarded lender confirmations, loan satisfied, lien released, each subject line a silent drumbeat. On the first bright morning of March, with maple sap running and sidewalks emerging from beneath months of ice, an email pinged my phone during office hours. Subject: Pinewind Cove, escrow closed. The attachment showed a closing statement stamped funded in block red letters. My name appeared only once, deep in the signature block: Emily Walker, authorized member, Pineglade Holdings LLC. I ended class 10 minutes early. Outside, the air smelled faintly of thawing earth. I walked to the lake, boots crunching salt crystals, until the water came into view, still frozen in places, but split by dark veins that widened toward shore. I took the deed from my bag, edges still warm from the copier, and held it up against the sunlight. A single sheet of paper, weightless, yet heavier than any key I'd never been given. Let them deck their hallways with golden frames of Madison's victories. Let them count on one more summer at a house they thought belonged to them. Quietly, legally, irrevocably, the shoreline had shifted. I folded the deed and tucked it inside my coat, the edges firm against my heart, and felt the hush of late winter settle into something fierce and new. Summer arrived in slow, humid waves, but the emails from my mother stayed frostbite cold, polite subject lines, checking in, quick question, followed by paragraphs that sounded like weather reports until they pivoted into guilt. Dad forwarded links to online articles about smart investing for millennials, as if sending advice could pass for intimacy. Madison, meanwhile, treated voice notes like postcards from a vacation I wasn't invited to. "The lake house will be so ready by July," she trilled one afternoon, a gull laughing somewhere in the background. Think champagne on the dock under fireworks. I listened once, twice, then smiled at my phone the way you might smile at a child announcing the moon was made of frosting. "Will it?" I whispered, tapping delete. Quiet became a discipline. I woke early, graded papers in the glow of dawn, and reserved afternoons for Pinewind Cove. The gravel road that curved toward the water was lined with maples, their canopies thick and emerald. I parked beneath them and let cicada song fill my ears as I carried supplies inside: copper fittings for the leaking faucet, a bucket of exterior paint matched to the clapboard's weathered cream, a new mailbox flag because the old one dangled like a loose tooth. The house smelled of sawdust and possibility. I replaced the warped plank on the porch and realigned the screen door so it no longer whined. Each fix felt like stitching torn fabric, tiny motions, clean lines, purpose humming in my fingertips. By late August, I was routing utility bills to my apartment and forwarding their glossy catalogs here. September brought crisp air and wood smoke from neighboring cabins. I stacked logs under the eaves, imagining December nights when the stove would perfume the rooms with cedar. I kept my visits secret, scheduling them between lectures and office hours. If Mom texted "miss you this weekend," I replied Monday morning with a neutral "busy with grading, maybe next week." She never pressed. In October, golden leaves drifted onto the lake's glassy surface, and Madison posted a filtered photo of herself in front of a boutique hardware store, captioned "Weekend Haul for Lake Home Reno." I stared at the image, then at the new cabinet knobs I'd installed the day before, knobs she'd never touch, and marveled at how seamlessly illusion could cut its own cloth. The silence between us lengthened. I could almost feel it pulsing through my phone, as if they sensed tectonic movement beneath their feet but couldn't name the rumble. When November settled, gray as a pencil sketch, I prepared the last details. I had 2 extra keys cut at the Montpelier hardware shop, slid one onto a plain ring, tucked it into a white jewelry box, and closed the lid without adding ribbon. It felt light in my palm, light enough to hide the gravity inside. I placed the box on my dresser where morning sun brushed its corners. Each day it reminded me, patience has weight too. Final exams came and went, students filed out of my classroom relieved and exhausted. On the last Friday before winter break, snow flurried against the window of my apartment, and a voicemail from Mom landed like a feather. "Hope to see you soon, sweetheart. We're planning a little reveal on Christmas morning." I pictured her rehearsing the moment, Madison cued to squeal, Dad ready to nod. I wrapped their envelope, my customary afterthought gift, with matte paper the color of tin, taped it shut, and set it beside the white box. 2 packages, one carrying my mother's expectation, the other my own quiet correction. Christmas Eve dawned pewter and wind-bitten. I brewed coffee, savoring the hush, then opened my closet and lifted the overnight bag, a sturdy canvas satchel Dad once gave me for conferences I never attended. I slid the white box into an interior pocket, the tin-wrapped envelope beside it. The zipper closed with a measured purr. Standing there, I thought how life sometimes turns on grand gestures, but often it's the soft click of a clasp that signals the real change. As dusk settled, I glanced around my apartment, papers graded, suitcase by the door, keys aligned on the hook. Outside, streetlights haloed falling snow. I inhaled, slow and deep, the scent of roasted chestnuts from the market 2 blocks down mingling with cold air sneaking through the window frame. In that breath I felt the entire year compress, the open safe, Tracy's steady counsel, the silent repairs, every unanswered message curling up like burned paper. This time, I whispered to the empty room, I'm the one giving the gift. I swung the bag over my shoulder, locked the door behind me, and stepped into the snow-dusted night. The tree still wore last year's ornaments, silver bells, crocheted angels, and the gaudy brass treble clef Mom insisted symbolized our harmonious family. The scent of cinnamon rolls drifted in from the kitchen, sweet but faint. Mom had let the timer beep too long while she staged Madison beside the fireplace for photos. Dad lounged in his usual spot on the sofa, a plaid throw tucked over his knees, face settling into that performative calm he used to regard as dignity. Madison perched cross-legged on the rug, curls carefully brushed over one shoulder, her new velvet pajama set chosen for how well it photographed. I stood behind the armchair, coffee cup warmed more by my palms than the liquid, and watched their pageant unfold. First came the small gifts, monogrammed towels for Dad, a spa certificate for Mom, silk scrunchies for Madison. A mild hush followed, as if the room inhaled in preparation. Mom lowered the needle on Bing Crosby and produced a glossy box the color of crushed cranberries. For our star, she sang, passing it to Madison with both hands. Madison's eyes shone in the pine-scented light. She peeled away the lid to reveal a designer handbag, all buttery camel leather and polished hardware. The family applause sounded automatic, like canned laughter. I joined in, a polite 2-second flutter of fingers against palm, and set my mug down. My father's head tipped toward me, expecting his moment of benevolence. I stepped forward and offered him a plain white box, no bow, no gift tag, only crisp edges and silence. He gave a light-hearted chuckle, the one he reserved for dad jokes and charity auctions, and shook it near his ear. Not socks again, I hope. He winked at Madison, who offered a conspiratorial grin. I said nothing. My chest felt oddly still, as if I'd swapped lungs for glass. Dad slid off the lid. Inside lay a stack of documents, neatly clipped, the foreclosure notice stamped cancelled, the warranty deed assigning Pinewind Cove to Pineglade Holdings LLC, the operating agreement listing a single member, me. He lifted the top page, scanned it, barked a soft laugh, then froze. The paper trembled between his fingers. Mom leaned in, smile fixed in place like a brooch. What's so funny? Her gaze skipped across the header, down the first paragraph, then stalled. Color drained from her cheeks as though someone had turned down the saturation knob. She tried to speak, swallowed instead. Madison sipped coffee, unbothered. What is it? She set her mug on the hearth, still angled for the camera, oblivious to everything but her own reflection in the brass fireplace screen. Dad cleared his throat, a small punctuation in the hush. Where did you get this? The question fell short of anger, dully weighted by disbelief. I stepped around the armchair, my heartbeat steady as a clock buried under wool. Public auction, I said. Right after the bank set the date. Mom's voice fluttered like trapped tissue paper. Emily, this must be a misunderstanding. The house is part of, she searched the air for a word that would make entitlement sound virtuous. The family legacy. I met her eyes. It is in the family. My name is on the deed. Madison frowned, finally sensing a mood that wasn't admiration. You bought the lake house? She emphasized you the way someone might emphasize mosquito. I did, I answered. Legally, quietly. Dad shifted forward, papers crumpling in his grip. Why would you go behind our backs? His voice tried for authority but cracked on the last word. I could have listed reasons: cupcakes never eaten, trophies never framed, signatures stolen like spare change, but explanations felt unnecessary. I wasn't behind your backs, I said softly. I was exactly where you left me. Silence expanded until it crowded out the holiday music, until the room felt undersized for 4 people and decades of invisible arithmetic. Mom's lower lip quivered, a detail I might once have hurried to soothe. Today it looked like the inevitable tremor of porcelain when a shelf finally shutters. Madison reached for her mug again, fingers missing the handle. Porcelain hit the stone hearth with a muffled clink, coffee bleeding into the grout. None of us moved to rescue it. I drew a breath laced with pine and cooling cinnamon. Last Christmas you gave Madison a key, I said, voice even. This year, I gave you the paperwork that makes mine the only key that works. Dad tried to reassemble authority. We can talk about this. Work out a fair arrangement. The arrangement is already fair, I replied. It's legal. It's done. Mom's eyes filled, not with tears but with calculation, strings she reached for and found severed. She inhaled as if to summon an old tone of gentle judgment, then exhaled empty. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Tracy's time-stamped confirmation of recorded transfer. I didn't need to read it. The deed rested in my overnight bag upstairs, weightless and immutable. In the hush, the twinkle lights on the tree clicked to a new cycle, blinking twice before settling. The room seemed to lean toward the silence, straining for a sound that would make sense of the air. There was none. Madison's voice cracked first, a brittle whisper, you can't just take it. But the sentence fell apart in her mouth. she hadn't learned verbs for losing. I slipped my hands into my coat pockets, fingers closing around nothing but lining. "I think breakfast is ready," I said, not as an offer but an ending. No one stood. The cinnamon rolls cooled on the counter, forgotten. The designer handbag slumped against torn wrapping, forgotten. The white box sat empty in Dad's lap, still plain, but now heavy with the weight it had carried all along. Silence settled again, thicker this time, pressing against the windows until the world outside felt far away and brilliantly cold. I stepped toward the hallway, and no one tried to stop me. "I don't understand," Madison repeated, sharper this time, as if volume might bend the facts. "What do you mean you own it?" She stood in front of the hearth clutching her designer handbag like a life vest, eyes darting between me and the stack of papers in Dad's grip. Dad flipped through the pages for the third time, his thumb smearing a crescent of sweat along the margin. "These filings can't be right," he muttered. "Something's been misrecorded." He paused on the foreclosure notice, squeezing it so hard the paper buckled. Mom hovered behind him, one hand pressed to his shoulder in a gesture meant to calm but that looked more like a bid for control. The room felt different now, colder, as if someone had cracked a window, letting December seep in. The evergreen candle struggled against the chill, its artificial pine scent suddenly cloying. The twinkle lights no longer seemed festive, they blinked like erratic heartbeats. "It's all legitimate," I said, keeping my voice level. "You had 90 days to cure the default. You didn't." The auction proceeded, bids were accepted. Mine won. Dad shook his head, the motion stiff, mechanical. "We were arranging refinancing." "These timelines." "Refinancing?" Madison snapped. "Dad, you told me the bank was on hold until February." Her gaze cut to me, cheeks flushing hot. "This is sabotage. You waited until we got everything nearly perfect, then swept in to steal it." "I bought a public asset," I corrected quietly. "No sabotage. No theft." Mom stepped forward, her robe sleeve brushing a strand of tinsel from the coffee table. "Emily, sweetheart, the lake house was meant to stay in the family. Your father and I always said." "It is staying in the family," I replied. "You just forgot I was part of it." She blinked, lips parting around an unvoiced argument. The silence that followed carried weight, years of half-heard acknowledgments, praise rationed like currency, signatures borrowed without consent. Madison's eyes glistened, anger and disbelief fighting for space. "We poured thousands into renovations. I designed the whole interior, hired a photographer for July. You think you can just waltz in, Anne?" "You used my name to finance it," I said, soft as falling snow. "You built your dream with my credit score and my forged signature. I'm simply reclaiming what was already mine on paper." Dad's composure fractured then. He slapped the document stack onto the coffee table, pages fanning like startled doves. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice cracked, deeper than I'd ever heard, equal parts wounded pride and genuine fear. "You've jeopardized our entire retirement plan. Your mother's been counting on that property's value." "The taxes." "The taxes were being paid late," I interrupted. "Late enough that county notices went to collections." I held his gaze, unflinching. "Did you intend to let that slide too?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. The air sagged with things he could no longer defend. Mom's hand tightened on Dad's shoulder. "We can fix this," she said, voice trembling like porcelain on a train. "We'll refinance under your name legitimately, transfer partial equity back. We'll draw up new paperwork." I shook my head. "No new paperwork." Madison took a step toward me, heels clicking on the hardwood. "This isn't fair," Emily. You let us plan the whole year. You watched me post about renovations, watched Mom order new furniture, knowing you were going to pull the rug out. Why didn't you say something? I did, I said softly. I said nothing, and you heard exactly what you wanted. Her brows knit, but she found no purchase in the words. Dad gathered the scattered pages, straightened them against his thigh, and dropped them back into the box as if returning a genie to its lamp. He looked older than an hour ago, the grooves beside his mouth deeper, the silver at his temples starker. There will be legal consequences, he warned, though it sounded like wishful thinking. Undue influence, breach of. Consult counsel, I said. I already have. Mom's eyes glossed, not with tears but calculation that had finally failed. We raised you better than this. A hollow laugh almost escaped me, but I swallowed it, letting the silence answer for me. The room's warmth dwindled as if the fire had learned it was no longer welcome. Outside, snowflakes brushed the pane, each one a tiny hush. Madison's mug lay shattered at her feet, coffee seeping into the braided rug. Nobody bent to clean it. The hush grew stifling, pressing against skin, demanding a sound. None came. Dad folded the white box's lid shut, the cardboard edges whispering together. We'll challenge it, he said to no one, maybe himself. There's always a loophole. There isn't, I murmured. And even if there were, the bank is satisfied, the county is satisfied. Only your expectations remain unpaid. He lifted his gaze, eyes glassy but hard. You've humiliated us. Your mother, your sister. This isn't humiliation, I answered, keeping my tone even. Humiliation requires an audience. This is family. Mom's posture sagged, as though the marionette strings of pride had finally snapped. We just wanted something beautiful for all of us, she whispered. You wanted it for Madison, I said, gentle now, because the fight was no longer necessary. I simply stepped out of the shadow you'd built around me. The fireplace crackled, a log collapsing in on itself. I turned toward the hallway, bag already slung over my shoulder, though I couldn't recall picking it up. Dad's question echoed behind me, frayed around the edges. What will people think? I paused at the doorway, glancing back at the room where wrapping paper fluttered like fallen leaves, ornaments twinkled with forced cheer, and 3 people I ought to have loved stared at me as though I had rewritten the laws of gravity. They'll think, I said, voice barely above a whisper, that I finally chose myself. Then I stepped into the corridor, and the hush closed behind me like a book snapped shut on the last page. Dad's voice cracked through the entryway like splitting timber. You walk out that door, you're not welcome here anymore. He stood rigid beneath the chandelier's amber glow, cheeks flushed the color of winter apples, one hand pressed against the white box that now felt more coffin than gift. Snow filtered past the sidelights, soft and deliberate, a silent audience to our private reckoning. I slid my arms into my wool coat, the lining still carrying the scent of cedar from the lake house closet. Buttons clicked home one by one, tiny affirmations. When I lifted my gaze, his eyes were blazing, hurt masquerading as authority. I never was, I said, the words arriving almost gently, as if spoken by someone discovering an echo inside herself for the first time. Mom stepped forward, arms half open, voice syrupy with practiced sorrow. Emily, darling, don't do this. We can fix whatever paperwork mix-up Tracy's confused you with. Let's be reasonable. Christmas is about forgiveness. Her manicured hand touched my sleeve, fingernails cool against the cloth, the same fingers that had typed contracts behind my back. I eased away, a small shift, enough to let her know the distance wasn't anger but boundary. Behind her, Madison stood rooted to the rug, handbag hugged close to her ribs, lips parted though no sound came. The realization of loss had frozen her into a marble version of herself, still luminous, but lifeless. Mom tried again, voice lowering, the intimate register she used when coaxing favors. Honey, be careful. Buyer's remorse is real. You don't want to brand yourself as the daughter who ruined Christmas. I almost smiled at the desperation coiled inside that sentence. I'm not ruining anything, I said. I'm simply stepping out of something that was never mine to begin with. She searched my face for a crack, some sign of the pliable daughter she could still bend, but found only quiet certainty. A gust rattled the storm door behind me, scattering pine needles across the foyer tile. Madison finally spoke, her tone thin but sharp. So that's it? You burn the bridge and just leave? She sounded less angry than bewildered, like a child discovering gravity after years of floating. I held her gaze long enough to feel whatever shared childhood we'd had dissolve into the space between us. I'm not burning anything, I answered. I'm walking over a bridge you never even saw. Dad's hand slammed the side table, ceramic nativity figures jumping in place. Ungrateful. The word came out hoarse, as though scraped from his throat. After everything. His shoulders pitched forward, decades of entitlement collapsing under their own weight. We gave you a good life. You gave me a useful signature, I said softly. And you took more than you can list on any ledger. Mom's composure wavered, she pressed fingertips to her temples, a gesture part headache, part theater. You're punishing us because we love your sister differently. Families aren't perfect, Emily, but they stay together. I exhaled slowly, watching her attempt to knit guilt into a safety net she assumed I'd still fall for. Love doesn't need perfect math, I replied. It just can't be embezzled. Snowflakes drifted onto the threshold, the cold seeped in around my ankles, yet inside my chest something warmed, steady, ember-hot. Perhaps that was what release felt like, not relief nor euphoria, but a temperate flame where resentment used to live. Dad took one step closer, voice dropping into finality. If you go now, don't expect to come back for handouts when that place bleeds you dry. Doors close both ways. His words clanged like steel, but the threat felt hollow, a bank account already overdrawn. I pictured the lake house catching morning light, water glassy and forgiving, and knew which door mattered. My hand found the brass knob. Behind me, Mom breathed my name, half plea, half warning. For a moment I tasted 10-year-old frosting in the back of my throat, remembered cupcakes no one ate and trophies no one framed. The hallway smelled of cedar garland and cinnamon gone cold. I realized I was done collecting those scents. Snowflakes pinned themselves to my coat as I stepped onto the porch. The wind cut sharp, but I felt only the heat of motion. I closed the door gently, no slam, no flourish, just a latch settling into place like a period at the end of a sentence long overdue. At the curb, silence wrapped the neighborhood, broken only by the distant rumble of a plow. I slid into the driver's seat, pulled off my glove, and slipped my fingers into the inner pocket where the lake house key rested. Its edges warmed instantly against my palm, a promise quietly pulsing. I turned the engine, headlights carving tunnels through the flurries, and glanced once at the house receding in the mirror. No figures appeared at the window. No last-minute apologies chased me down the walk. The absence felt oddly merciful. The tires crunched over fresh powder as I steered toward the main road, and with every rotation the distance lengthened, not measured in miles but in breaths finally taken without permission. Cold air hissed through the cracked window, but inside, beneath layers of wool and decision, warmth unfurled, steady, sovereign, mine. The lake house greeted me with a silence so soft it felt padded, as if the walls themselves had decided to muffle the past. Snow lay heavy on the porch rail, pristine and unshoveled, the drifts at the foot of the steps rounding off every hard edge. I hauled my single duffel across the threshold and watched my breath bloom in the entryway until the furnace kicked on with a low, reassuring hum. Outside, January light fell in dusky ribbons through clouds. Inside, I struck a match, coaxed a small fire in the living room stove, and let the first pop of sap echo like punctuation in the hush. It wasn't heat that I needed, my coat was doing its job, but noise with purpose, evidence that something here would answer me back. When the flame steadied, I wandered room to room, switching on lamps the previous owners had left, casting warm pools across bare pine floors. A half-finished crown molding project ringed the great room like a paper collar someone forgot to unbutton. Blue painter's tape drooped from corners in surrender. Madison had recorded reels in this very spot, bragging about our improvised farmhouse chic. Now the tape lines felt less like ambition, more like ghosts of an idea that never asked my permission. I unzipped the duffel and unpacked deliberately. 3 sweaters, 2 flannel shirts, jeans folded tight, the hydroelectric dam trophy cushioned in an old towel. I placed the little metal dam on the mantel, its brass plaque winking in firelight. The trophy looked absurd here, popsicle sticks and tiny LED bulbs in a cabin of cedar beams, but absurdity never bothered me. It was proof. My signature on that project had been my own. Next came the practical work. The kitchen faucet wheezed whenever it delivered water, a rusted washer revealed itself beneath the handle. I crouched under the sink, wrench in hand, feeling the day's first thread of satisfaction tighten. Fixing something small is a promise to fix something larger, eventually. When the drip ceased, I adjusted the curtains in the main bedroom. They'd been hung an inch too high, pooling at the sill like awkward pants. I rehung them flush, grabbed a box of my parents' leftover decor, golden pineapple bookends, seashell picture frames, opened the back door, and tossed it all into the shed. Snowflakes spiraled in and kissed the hardwood before the latch clicked shut. Upstairs, I discovered a roll of peel-and-stick wallpaper Madison had chosen, pastel palm leaves, tropical escapism for a Vermont lake. I left it leaning in the hallway like a bad punchline. In its place, I framed an 8x10 photo of my 14-year-old self at the regional science fair, bangs uneven, braces flashing, arms wrapped around that same miniature dam. I hung it in the stairwell at eye level. No gilded frame, just plain black metal from the craft store. When I stepped back, the image looked modest and unassuming, which felt exactly right for a truth that had been ignored too long. Night stole in early. The stove's glass door glowed orange, reflecting off the lake beyond the windows where the ice lay quilted in moonlight. I brewed tea and settled into a chair by the picture window, mug nested between my palms. Steam rose into the cold glass, tracing fleeting shapes that vanished before they formed. Snow sifted from a pewter sky, tiny comets dissolving against the frozen water. The hush out there matched the hush inside me, both wide, both necessary. Every so often my phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it. I wasn't angry, anger takes energy intended for better things. Instead, I noted each vibration the way a lighthouse notes distant foghorns, confirmation of what drifts beyond, nothing more. The house settled, wooden timbers sighing as temperature equalized, while my thoughts stilled into slower rhythms. I noticed the faint scent of cedar lingering in the loft beams, the subtle click of the thermostat every time the furnace cut in, the squeak of waxy snow crystals skittering across the window pane. They were quiet facts, none of them clamoring for attention. I realized I had come here believing I needed to heal, but really, healing suggests injury and bones knitting under supervision. What I needed was simpler, a place where I could stop bleeding. The fire burned low, I fed it 2 small logs. Embers blinked open like shy eyes. I cradled the mug and felt its warmth soak into my fingers, traveling up my wrists in a steady pulse. Somewhere in the distance a branch cracked under snow's weight. Nothing answered it. The stillness remained intact, and so did I. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't listening for footsteps, or a ping from Madison's curated universe, or the hitch in Mom's voice that signaled fresh manipulation. The silence here held shape, not emptiness, room temperature quiet, ready to be filled on my terms. I took a long sip of tea, tasting chamomile and a hint of honey, and watched snow sweep across the dark lake until horizon and shore blurred into a single soft edge. I wasn't lonely. I was just alone. And that was okay. The first voicemail arrived 3 days after New Year's, a tinny echo in the kitchen where I was kneading bread dough. Mom's voice sounded winded, as though she'd sprinted to outrun the consequences and dialed mid-stride. "Emily, sweetheart, we need to talk." I let the timer beep twice before I pressed delete, wiping the flour from my thumbs against my jeans. She didn't even make it to the end of her sentence. They always called when control slipped. Snow clung to the windows and crystalline maps. Beyond them, the lake lay silent beneath a pewter sky. Each morning I shoveled the porch, fed the wood stove, painted another stretch of baseboard. Routine settled over the house like fresh primer, clean, blank, willing to hold whatever color I chose. Meanwhile my phone collected unheard pleas the way gutters collect thaw water. Another from Mom: "Your father isn't well, he's under terrible stress, can't we, delete?" A third, her voice thin with practiced martyrdom: "This isn't how families, we're worried, delete." Madison switched tactics, leaving a voice note bright with false bravado. "You think this makes you a winner? Enjoy your creepy cabin, sis. Don't come begging when the pipes burst." The message ended with forced laughter and a sharp inhale, the sound of ego choking on air. I set the phone face down and stirred a pot of lentil soup, its steam curling into the rafters. Days unfurled like bolts of quiet fabric. I stripped the palm leaf wallpaper leaning in the hallway and replaced it with sage paint that reminded me of field grass after rain. I baked cinnamon rolls, letting brown sugar scent the rooms until the past saccharine memories lost their sting. Evenings I read by the fire, Steinbeck, a well-thumbed physics text, and let the silence resettle between chapters. Not empty silence, inhabited silence, weighted like a good quilt. News of my parents traveled the way gossip always does in small New England towns, faster than plowed roads. Mrs. Dodd, who lived 2 coves over, mentioned over the post office counter that Dad had canceled his club membership. "Budget tightening," she whispered, eyes bright with sympathetic thrill. The pharmacist in town asked if I'd pass on brochures for lower back pain therapy. Apparently Dad's discomfort had become a common topic. Each tidbit landed lightly, like snow on pine needles, accumulating without ever soaking through. Mid-January brought a heavier voicemail. Mom's tone cracked. "Your father had a panic episode. He's seeing the cardiologist next week. Emily, please, this is tearing the family apart." I pictured Dad pacing the den, blood pressure cuff tightening, the television muted on a golf channel nobody really watched. My thumb hovered an extra second before deleting. I was surprised by the absence of anger. I felt almost tender, the way one feels when watching an old dog chase dreams in its sleep, sadness buffered by distance. Madison's next note dripped resentment. "Mom's been crying for days. You're just sitting up there playing frontier woman. Grow up." She didn't mention her boyfriend, the one whose promotion had been Dad's favorite brag. Rumor said that relationship ended when Madison suggested a joint loan. I listened to the hiss of the wood stove, let the embers settle, and marked my page in Steinbeck. Late one afternoon, while I sanded a rough patch on the stair rail, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it but answered out of habit. A neighbor from my parents' cul-de-sac cleared her throat, trying for breezy. "Just checking, you know your folks put the main house on the market? Big for sale sign went up yesterday." I could hear the curiosity straining at her civility. they said downsizing. I thanked her, hung up, and felt nothing like triumph, only the faint shift of plates beneath an old foundation, a sound you register, note, and move past. Voicemails kept coming. The timbre evolved, desperation soured into righteousness, righteousness thinned into blame. One evening I set my phone on the windowsill, the lake glowing blue in moonlight, and listened in speaker mode while I brewed tea. Mom's voice warbled, "People are asking questions. Your sister is humiliated. How could you do this after all we sacrificed?" I sipped the tea, tasting chamomile and wild honey, and watched her words drift out like vapor, dissolving against the pane. The final message came just as February's first storm rattled the eaves. Madison's tone was brittle, the anger exhausted. "We were your family," she said, each word scraping the next. "Blood doesn't unbind just because you signed a deed." Her breath struck the microphone, then silence, then a muted sob she hadn't meant to record. I stood in the doorway, snow swirling in the lamp glow behind me, and whispered to the empty house, "You were never mine." I scrolled through the call log, 24 missed numbers, each a tether. One by one I pressed delete until the list cleared, white and unburdened. Then I toggled to blocked contacts, selected every entry, tapped remove from block list, and just as quickly added each back again. Not to punish, simply to remind myself the barrier was mine to raise or lower. Outside, thick flakes quilted the porch railing. The lake, half frozen, reflected the storm's gauzy light. I placed the phone inside a kitchen drawer, closed it softly, and breathed. The quiet rallied around me, unbroken, intact. The fire snapped, the kettle hummed, floorboards sighed under settling heat. Somewhere in town, stories about the Walkers would grow wilder, spinning theories to explain how the invisible daughter became a fulcrum. But here, only tea cooled, bread rose, paint dried. My resolve didn't feel cold, it felt composed, like still water under ice, alive, waiting for thaw. I picked up my book, claimed the armchair beside the stove, and let the hush deepen, enveloping the house, folding me into its tempered calm. Birdsong returned to the lake the same week the ice surrendered in slow, glassy shards. I stood on the porch rail with a paintbrush in one hand, pale sunlight warming my shoulders through a flannel shirt, and listened to the water crack and sigh as if it, too, had decided to loosen its grip on old seasons. Closure, I used to imagine, would roar like an applause or clang like a verdict, but it arrived on the wings of small sparrows and the soft drip of meltwater from the eaves. Inside, the spare bedroom smelled of primer and possibility. I rolled a final coat of muted sage across the wall, covering the last trace of leftover palm leaf wallpaper. Each stroke felt less like erasure and more like breathing room. When the roller clacked empty, I stepped back, breathed in the paint's faint bite, and felt no memories tug at the edges. Just color settling on fresh drywall. I opened the windows to let the March breeze wander through, then carried the tray and brushes to the mudroom sink. A robin tilted its head on the deck rail, studying me with glossy curiosity. Beyond it, the lake gleamed with ragged mirrors of open water, ice floes drifting apart like thoughts finally released. Later, I dragged a cedar planter onto the back patio, filled it with dark soil, and pressed herb seeds into furrows, basil, thyme, a row of dill for summer fish dinners I could already taste. My gloves held the scent of earth and early thaw, richer than any candle my mother ever lit. Kneeling there, I realized I wasn't cultivating solace, I was simply making room for something of my own to root. Afternoons stretched quietly. I kept a stack of blank pages on the kitchen table beside a fountain pen Dad once gave me for a birthday he nearly forgot. I wrote in loose, unrolled lines, lists of books I wanted to teach, sketches of spring renovations, recipes half remembered from college roommates. They weren't diary entries, I wasn't cataloging pain or plotting triumph. I was mapping forward. Sometimes a sentence about Madison drifted in, or a phrase Mom used when I was small. I let them float, unmoored, then eased them off the page like dandelion fluff. One morning, while wiping dust from the window sash, I caught my reflection beside the lake's shimmer and noted, with a quiet startle, that my face looked lighter, shoulders no longer curved in polite apology. A line of laughter pressed near my mouth I hadn't noticed forming all winter. Grief shears and anger scorches, but peace, I learned, polishes. News from my parents arrived only through town rumor: a condo closing near Boston, Dad's short stay in cardiac rehab, Madison's move to a studio apartment funded by brand deal side gigs. I greeted each update the way I greeted passing clouds, acknowledging shape, letting them drift. My phone, still nestled in the kitchen drawer, buzzed now and then. The sound felt distant, an echo from a corridor I'd sealed off. I didn't reach for it. Early evenings I settled in the armchair by the picture window, journal open, tea cooling at my elbow. Sunlight lingered longer, pooling gold across the water before dipping behind spruce crowns. The ice broke into smaller rafts, then thin plates, then nothing but rippled reflections of sky. When twilight arrived, loons called in twos and threes, their vowels stretching wide across the cove. I could sit for an hour, simply listening, feeling the house breathe with me. One dusk, pen hovering over a blank page, a realization unfolded with the gentleness of a petal. I had spent years waiting to be invited, into conversations, into photographs, into a family myth that needed a supporting character. The invitation never came because I had always been outside the story they were telling. All along, the door to another story had been in my own hands. I set the pen down, stood, and opened the porch door. Cold air slipped around my ankles, but beneath the chill lay an unmistakable promise of thaw. I stepped onto the planks, savoring their quiet give under my weight, and watched the last sliver of sun tint the horizon. The sky drank the color slowly, like tea cooling just enough to sip. Out loud, to no one, I said, I never needed them to say I mattered. I just needed to stop asking. On the lake, a single duck paddled through a melt pool, leaving an arrow of ripples that widened, softened, and disappeared. Light faded. The first stars pricked through. I lingered until cold pinched my cheeks, then slipped back inside, closing the door with a soft click that settled into the walls like a lullaby. I topped the stove with another log, stirred the embers, let them catch. The room glowed deep amber, shadows dancing up the newly painted hallway, and I watched until the rhythm slowed, until the fire's crackle matched my own heartbeat. Birdsong eased into night hush. The lake exhaled mist that ghosted across the glass. I turned off the lamp, trusting the fire's pulse to light my way to bed, and held the moment like a warm stone, solid, quiet, undeniably mine. And that was the most peaceful thing I've ever done. I used to think peace had to come from someone else, an apology, an open door, a place at the table. But sometimes, peace is just choosing to walk away from where love stopped showing up. In this life, not everyone who shares your name deserves a seat in your heart, and that's not bitterness, it's clarity. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, know this: choosing yourself is its own kind of victory. And if this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear what it brought up, about letting go, coming home, or finding peace on your own terms.